look at the future and trying to figure out what was going to happen and being exceptionally wrong. For example, Lincoln Stevens, who was a writer in the 1900s. In 1990, he wrote about the Soviet Union. He said, "I have seen the future and it works." Well, it didn't. But he sure thought that's what he was going to see in the future. In 1928, a man by the name of Ernest Betts wrote a book called The Future of Film, in which he said these talking films that are coming out will not catch on. They're just a gimmick, but the true art of cinema is the silent film. It always will be. And he was completely wrong, because nobody's making silent films anymore. In 1968, a man by the name of Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb, which he looked and said that the rate at which the world is growing and the amount of food that we can produce is unsustainable. And he said by the 1980s there would be massive starvation as the population grew too much and the world could not be fed. But you probably noticed that we made it through the 80s and we're eating as much as we ever have. So why all these terrible predictions? Well, it's really because these people had the unfortunate problem of writing them down. You see, we all think we know what is coming up, but normally we make a prediction or we think about the future and we think we know what's going to happen, and when it comes to fruition, we say, "Oh, how smart we were." But when we don't get it, we forget about it. We remember our hits, we forget our misses. As the author of the book, Jacob Schollinger, said, "There's no punishment for things that no one remembers that one has done. The prediction business thus becomes a lot like heads I win, tails we forgot that you had a bet." And that's why we're not really good at predicting the future. We might think we know what was going to happen, and we might look back and say, "Oh yeah, I saw it coming." But the truth is, if we get really honest with it, if we write it down, we begin to notice we really don't know what's going to happen. So does that mean if we don't know, we can't predict the future? We just don't need to worry about it? Just to give up? Have no thought for the morrow? Because we don't know what's coming, so there's nothing that we can do about it? Well, we may not be able to predict the future. We can't predict the future, but we can plan for it. Is there a difference? Well, today I want to look at a biblical example of what I'm talking about. A biblical example of someone who didn't know exactly what the future was, but that couldn't stop him from being ready for whatever would come. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, we see that David decides that he wants to build the temple of God. At this point in the time, David has reached his career where everything has finally settled down. His enemies have been put to bay. His kingdom has been established. The civil war that came about with Saul is over. The enemies have been put to bay. His kingdom is on the growth. But what we read in 2 Samuel chapter 1 through 3 is that David looks around and says, "I'm enjoying all this, but the ark of the God, the representation of God among us, it sits where it's always set, in a tent. And that's just not right. God deserves more." So David comes up with an idea, and he approaches the prophet Nathan, and he tells him about this problem. And Nathan sees what he's thinking, and he says, "You should do it. God will be with you." And so David makes a plan that he is going to build a temple for God. And he gets an idea that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to build this great and glorious temple because God is deserving of it. The only problem is he never bothered to talk to God. That very night in 2 Samuel chapter 7:5, God comes to the prophet Nathan and tells him, "Go and say to my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one who should build a house for me to dwell in?" You see, David was so sure he knew what should happen. He knew how it was going to happen. He was going to build a temple for God. But God said, "What makes you think I want you to do that?" In fact, you would go down in verse 7, it says, "When have I ever said anything about this to you? When have I ever commanded it to you? In all these years, with all the tribes, when have I ever said, why have you not built a house of cedar?" You see, David was so sure he knew what should be done that he already had predicted how it was going to go. But he really didn't know. You know, there's an old saying, man plans and God laughs. That we think we know what's coming in the future. We think we know what's going to happen tomorrow. We've got our plans. We've got our predictions. We've got everything set, but we forget that we really don't know. In fact, God had a different plan. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12, he tells, when your days are complete, to David, you will lie down with your fathers, and I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. See, David had predicted he would build the house of God, but that wasn't God's plan. His plan was for the one to come after him to do it. Probably best summarized in Acts chapter 7 and verse 46 and 47. But it says, David found favor in God's sight and asked that he might find a dwelling place for the house of God, but it was Solomon who built the house for him. You see, God had a plan. David thought he knew what that plan was before he even asked God, before he even considered it. It wasn't that David wasn't a good person, but yet God had something different. So when David finds out about this plan, what does he do? It's not what he thought it would be. But that doesn't mean David says, well, there's nothing to be done. In fact, we read about this in our scripture reading in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 5. It tells that David said, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord is exceedingly magnificent and famous, and shall be glorious throughout the lands. Therefore, now I will make preparation for it. And so David made ample preparations before his death. You see, David says, well, I didn't know what was coming. I thought it was going to be me. But it's not. God's told me that. But that doesn't mean then that I don't have to worry about it. He says, no, I will help out. Because if Solomon's the one that's going to build it, I know that's going to be a tough task for him. He's new in his leadership role. And I'm going to make sure that he has everything he needs when he does that task, that it will be worthy of the God whom it's being made for. And so David started making preparations for it. See, he didn't know how it was going to take place, but he did know that he could prepare for it. He would tell his son Solomon later in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verses 7 through 9. He said, my son, I intended to build a house in the name of the Lord my God, but the word of God came to me saying, you have shed much blood and waged great wars. You shall not build a house for my name, because you have shed so much blood on the earth before me. Behold, a son will be born to you. He will be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from his enemies on every side. And his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace and quiet to Israel in his days. David, you're not the one to do this. David, you've spent most of your life fighting battles and fighting wars, and I want the person to build my house to be focused solely upon it, to be a man of peace. Because it's a house of peace. And he wants to set the right tone and the right image. And David said, that's what I intended to do. That's what I thought was what was going to happen. But God had different plans. But for David, that didn't mean he couldn't be part of it. Notice what he says in 2 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 14. He said, now behold, with great pain I had prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, and 100,000 talents of silver, and bronze and iron beyond weight, for they are great in quantity. Also timber and stone I have prepared, and you may add to them. You see, David didn't just sit and said, well, that's a problem for Solomon in the future. No, he said, I have taken great effort to build up everything that you will need in order to complete this task. And what we're talking about here is not just a minuscule amount. Talent was a person's weight in gold. And it's 100,000 talents. You do the math, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. You're talking about great amount of resources. Because David was thinking, I may not know how God's going to do it, but I do know God has a plan for it. And so I'm going to do everything I can to help Solomon in the future be able to take care of this task. And it wasn't just that he created resources for him, gold and silver. In verses 17 and 19 it says, David also commended all of the leaders of Israel to help his son Solomon, saying, Is it not the Lord your God who is with you? Has he not given you rest on every side? Has he not given you inhabitants of the land into my hands? And the land is now subdued before the Lord and his people. Now set your hearts and your soul to seek the Lord. Arise, therefore, and build the sanctuary of the Lord your God, so that you may bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God into the house that is to be built for the name of the Lord. He goes to all the people of the land, to all the leaders, and he says, we have a future ahead of us. God has something prepared in Solomon, and we need to get ourselves ready to do it. We need to set our hearts and our soul to seek the Lord your God. We need to build a place worthy for God, and we need to be a people worthy of God. And so David set these plans in order. Because, why? Because he was preparing. He was planning. He was looking forward. Because he knew God's general will. You see, we don't always have God's timetable. We don't always have his exact plans. We don't know what tomorrow may bring. But we can know what God wants for us and what God has commanded us and what he has told us. And because we know that, we can start prepping, we can start preparing to make sure we're ready for whatever and whenever God needs us and wants us to go. It's very similar to what Jesus talks about in Luke chapter 12 in verses 42 through 46. Here he's talking about a parable of preparation. And he compares it to servants who have been given a task by their master. And their master goes away, leaving them in charge and saying, here's what you need to take care of. Here's the job that you're put forth. And it says in verse 42, And the Lord said, Who then is the faithful and sensible steward, whom the master will put in charge of his servants and give them their rations at the proper times? Blessed is the slave whom the master finds doing so when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of his possessions. Who is the faithful servant? It's the one who says, I don't know when the master's coming back, but I do know what he's commanded me to do. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that when he comes, I'm ready. And that I have fulfilled the task that has been given to me. That is the one who the Lord will reward. But he says in verse 45, But that slave that says in his heart, My master will not be coming for a long time. And he begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, to eat and drink and to become drunk. The master of that slave will come in a day that he does not expect and in an hour that he does not know, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. He doesn't know when the master's coming, so he thinks, well, I'll be able to figure it out. I know he's not coming right now, so I can just do what I want to do. I can just live how I want to live, and then maybe at the right time, I'll get everything together. I'll just put it off. It's not my problem right now. And so he starts to beat the other slaves. He spends more time seeking his pleasure. When the master comes, what does he do of him? Well, he's not rewarded. He's condemned. When we think we know what we don't, it always leads to trouble. When we think we know it all, we usually find ourselves doing what we shouldn't. But what we do know, we must take care of. Sometimes we hear that phrase, someone was caught unaware. And sometimes that happens, right? Something happens, we had no idea it was coming. But sometimes we say we were caught unaware when really what it is we were caught unwilling to be prepared. Right? Because there was that possibility that it could come, and we didn't take care of it. There was something that was bound to happen, but we just ignored it and hoped it would go away. You see, there are things that we don't know, but that doesn't mean we can't prepare ourselves for what we do. You see, we don't know when Christ is coming. A lot of people will try to predict it. A lot of people will say, well, this event's going to show us that it's coming. But they don't know, because no one knows. But just because we don't know when he is coming doesn't mean that he isn't coming, and doesn't mean that we don't need to prepare for his return. That we find ourselves faithful in doing what we're supposed to. That we're taking care of the tasks that are assigned to us because we want to be found faithful when he does. We don't know when we'll die. We may think we have an idea. We may think we're going to get to live to 70, 80, 90, 100. But we don't know. We may think we only have a few more moments on this earth, but we don't know. We don't know when we'll die, but we do know we will. We do know it's coming. And we need to prepare ourselves for that fact. To prepare ourselves that there is something after this life, that there is something to come. And we need to say, well, that's something I'll think about later, right? When I get closer to death's door, then I'll take care of it. No, we need to think about it now and be prepared. So whenever it comes, we're ready. We don't know what suffering we'll face. We don't know any hardship that may come our way. The diagnosis that may come tomorrow. The accident that may happen. The crisis in our country, our nation, our land. We don't know what suffering we'll face, but we're told that we'll face it. So we need to fortify our faith. We need to establish ourselves so that when it does come, we have something to hold on to. We don't know what the next challenge will be. We can't predict what mistake will happen, what event will come, but we can prepare for it by being ready, by doing whatever we can, by saving up, by building up, by putting ourselves in the right mind and the right thought. You know, a lot of times if we try to do that when the moment of crisis comes, it's too late. When our test of faith comes, it's not the time to sit there and try to establish it. Rather, it's the time to lean on it, what we've had all along, what we've been doing all along. We don't know who will lead in the future, but we can plan for it by training and building up leaders. We can by preparing for the future, by not just saying, well, that's a problem for them later, but be thinking now, what can we do to prepare the next generation of leaders? To give them that experience and that asset that they can have, like David did for Solomon. So that he would have something for the future. Because failing to plan is planning to fail. We don't know what's coming in our lives, but we do know what God has told us. To be faithful in what we have. To know that his coming is occurrence. That at the end of our lives, there will be a judgment. That we need to be thinking not just of taking care of ourselves now, but of what we can be doing for the future. Jesus tells a parable in Luke chapter 12 and verses 17 through 21, and I think a lot of times we miss the point. It's a parable about a man who had a bumper crop, right? He had a great year. And because of that, he was going to make so much money that he thought, I could build up some bigger barns. I could tear down my old barns, build bigger barns, and then I would have enough that I could just retire and live off that and just have a great life. And so then he decides to do just that, and then what happens? It says that very night his life was taken from him. In other words, he didn't have a future. And a lot of times people read that and they think that the point of that parable is saying, well, see how foolish he was because he thought there's no future. He had a future when there wasn't. But that's not exactly what Jesus says the point of that parable is. In fact, he tells us in Luke chapter 12, verse 21, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Do you see the difference there? It wasn't the fact that this man was thinking about what could come in the future, but rather all he was thinking about was himself, and all he was thinking about was what he thought he knew was going to happen. He predicted, I'll have an easy life. This will do me all the good. But what he didn't realize is he didn't know what was coming the next day. But if he would have been thinking about God and his future with him, well, it might have changed what he did. So then is the man who is not rich towards God. We don't know what will come tomorrow, but we do know what will come for eternity. What are we doing with what we have to prepare for the future? Not that we will always know it, but we can plan and do the things that God tells us so that we will have what we need. That's exactly what David did. Back to 1 Chronicles chapter 29 and verses 2 through 3, he says, now with all my ability I have provided for the house of God. The gold for the things of gold, the silver for the things of silver, the bronze for the things of bronze, the irons for the things of irons, the wood for the things of wood, the stone and the inland stones, the stones of antimony, the stones of various colors, and all kinds of precious stones and alabaster in abundance. Moreover, in my delight in the house of God, the treasure I have of gold and silver, I give to the house of God over and above all that I have already provided for the holy temple. David said, I gave everything I could with all my ability. He wasn't just sitting and saying, well, my life's easy right now. God's taking care of me. I'll just run out the clock. He said, no, I know that there's something that God's going to do in the future. And I want to prepare for it with everything that I have. It wasn't just that he took of his kingdom, he took of his own house. He gave it his all. Because God meant that much to him. So how are we preparing for the future? Because we don't know what tomorrow may bring. But we do know what God has told us we need to be doing. We do know that God has told us of the judgment. We do know that God has said to us to be about his business. Instead of maybe focusing on just what we want and what will make our lives easier, we need to think about being rich towards God. Being rich towards the things that matter in eternity. To be preparing not just for ourselves, but for the Lord and his kingdom. For our next generation. For the future. As we try to go to a brighter future, we need to start preparing ourselves and what we have, for that is what's to come. And what better preparation then can you make than choosing your destination? We now might not know when we're leaving. We might not know when we're called, but we do know it's coming. And we do know what he's told us we must do. So today we need to ask ourselves, have I prepared for eternity? Have I been obedient to the commands that Jesus gave in regard to my salvation? Am I believing in the one who sent me, who saved me? Am I confessing his name? Am I living in a way that goes worldly? Or am I working for my master? That wicked slave, what did he do? He did everything wrong. But the faithful slave didn't do that. And that's why repentance is necessary. We can't be what we were if we want to be something different. And he did what the Lord told him to do. Have we done what the Lord has told us to do? He who believes and is baptized shall be saved, is the promise that Jesus gives us. Have we done that? Is our future, are we working towards our future? Are we preparing for what to come, no matter what it is? Are we living a life that sets up something better for the future? Today, if you're subject to the invitation, today if you need to give your life to Christ, today if you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, we want to offer you a chance to let that need be known right now while we stand and sing.